a lot of us spend a lot of time worried about different things because there's so many things we could control when we're mixing. Producing also, but a lot of us produce, mix, and we also do the mastering phase. Like, we do all of it. So depending on what you're doing, maybe you're doing all of it, you're going to need to know some stuff. There's a lot of things that could make you crazy if you don't have a mentor or somebody helping you out. Get rid of the nonsense and just cut to the points that make sense, especially because this is a field where there is no right answer. Tons of people have their own opinions about this stuff, so you got to decide who to listen to. There's a great article on Gearspace called, I don't know what it's called. It's John Haynes, who's Serban's assistant. So Serban, one of the best mixers ever, and he's still alive, and he's kicking. He's doing amazing. He does everything great. The dude, John Haynes, is his right-hand man. When John Haynes gave this interview, is like a book, and I wouldn't even call it an interview because it's more like a question and answer where tons of people wrote in different questions, and then John just answered all of them. It's a worthwhile read. I'll link to it, but I'm going to go over some of the points today that are in my opinion, the things that people need to know to put their mind at ease, because learning these things put my mind at ease. And a lot of them I learned years ago, but it's nice to see the same, just like you're doing the right thing when you look at this. Some of the stuff is stuff I may change based on what he's saying. And this interview was from a couple years ago. It's not brand new, but it's also not decades old. So this stuff is relevant. It's all stuff I'm sure everyone's thinking. So let's just talk about a few of the things. I may even do this tomorrow also if people like this idea. So just going to go over some stuff I thought was critical. One thing that was big, stems. A lot of people are always worried, and this was me too. I was in this camp. I was super worried that when I would make a mix that was great, that was signed off on by the artist, then they want stems, no problem. So you make them stems. But I was always worried that the stems are never going to sound when you put the stems together just like the final mix. Always worried about that. And the reason being is because we know as we're running our stuff through different parallel channels, possibly in addition to mix bus compression, things like this, when we separate everything down to just the bass, or bass and drums only now, or just the vocals, we know it can't possibly sound the same, because the way compression works, it works on the entire signal together. It blends together everything you're putting in there and works on it, right? So because of that, when you send one thing into it instead of everything, it's going to sound different, no matter how you look at it. So a lot of us are always worried, and some people go out of their way to do things like set up side chains to make it where it acts as if the compressor is being fed all these things when it's only being fed, the vocals, for example, that are audible, so that's all that will print, but it acts the same as if everything was sent into it. The thing is, this is additional work, takes additional time, and it's one of those things where is it worth doing or not? I guarantee you've probably thought about this if you're on that level, or you will soon. You will one day. And the point that I loved when I read this in this article was it does not matter to them. If it doesn't matter to Serban, doesn't matter to me anymore. All right. And that's the thing. This is one of those things where whenever you print stems, the client, the artist, may think that they can just put the stems together and it will equal the final mix. But as I just described, that's impossible. It's never going to happen that way. But what John Haynes describes is, this is his theory on it. He's like, look, you pay us to make a great sounding mix, and that's what we do. If you paid us to make individual stems all sound great, that's an entirely different thing. You're paying for an amazing mix. Now, the reasons people might need stems is because of either they're going to make remixes. In that case, it does not matter what the stems equal. If you add the stems up and they equal the final mix, it doesn't even matter if their intent is to make remixes, because a remix is going to be totally different anyway. So in that case, it doesn't matter if they all add up to the final mix exactly. And in the other case, maybe they're using it live. That's the other option. If they're using it live, it also doesn't matter if the stems add up to the final mix, because it's a live performance. It's going to sound different. So because of that, they don't worry about it. They just solo out the stuff that people want broken down, and they break it down. So that means they could do it however you want it. But the point is, if you want all vocals together, you'll get that. If you want vocals separate from backgrounds, you can get that. But all they're doing is soloing it and hitting play, and then that's it. Then they got the stem. They're not worrying about making sure that everything is now sent through the side chain in a way where the compressor works the same, so it equals the same. They don't care. So we don't care. Let that put your mind at ease, because like I just described, in those cases, it's not going to matter anyway, so it shouldn't matter to you. All right. And that's the point. If the client wants the stuff to add up to be the final mix, this is another thing he said, which you might as well know. He said, and it makes perfect sense. He said, lower every stem by 6 dB and then add a little mix bus compression on, everything summed together as a whole. So take each stem, send it to a bus, put on that bus some mix bus compression, and now you will be 99% of the way to the mix with that. So you could do that if you really wanted to get as close as possible to the mix. And people who do things for TV shows and, for movies, like, they know that. So that's just part of what they do when they take the stems, they lower them by 6 dB, they add a little mix bus compression, now it sounds back to the mix again, and they can manipulate it however they want. That's the point. That was John Haynes' answer. This is not my answer. This is his answer. And it's a great answer because it can put all our minds at rest. And all the people out there who want the stems to add up to be the exact final mix, the pros are not getting that. So you don't need to get that either. And that's the point. Let's go on to something else. But that was a big one because I know how many times people stress about that. And I get that question a lot in the lessons I give. And I always tell them it doesn't matter if it adds up to the whole. Like, they paid you to make a great mix. You delivered that. Now they want stems. That's a different thing. It's not the same thing that adds up to the whole. So bottom line is, Chris Lord-Alge, I've heard say the same exact thing too. It's not just Serban. So it doesn't matter whether you value that opinion of Serban or not. And John Haynes, it matters not, because Chris Lord-Alge feels the same way. He's like, it's never going to work that way. So, just do what I'm explaining. If you want it to equal the whole, 6 dB, little mix bus compression. Now, another thing, when I was starting out, this is something I remembered because I listened to what he said about de-essing. De-essers, right? Now, people always worry about where they should set the de-esser when you're starting out. When you're trying to get your ears in tune with what frequency is where in the beginning of your process, when you're starting mixing in the early years, you may not know where to put it. And you have all these choices. Should it be, my initial thought, I remember like it was yesterday, was like 8K, 10K, 12K. Like, it must be up there where the S's live, right? No, they don't. They live much lower down. And their go-to de-esser, their go-to is the Renaissance de-esser, which is very cheap. And it is also, like you just said it, I believe he said 5K. He may have said between 5K and 5.5K. That's where he sets it. Now, I also remember Jason Joshua said he likes 4.6K. That's his magic number. So you're getting the point here. It's not as high as you think. You're probably setting your de-esser too high if you're relatively new. And like in the frequency spectrum, set it back down towards between 4.5 and 5.5. That's the sweet spot for getting rid of S's. Now, don't hit it too hard on lead vocals, but you can hit it a little harder on background vocals, because that stuff, if it's happening at the same time as the lead vocal, it won't matter if it's ducking harder there. The same thing with breaths. You may have to take breaths down many dB, 10, 15 dB, let's say. If you're adding a ton of compression, the breaths come up a lot. So because of that, you don't want to hear somebody sounds like they have asthma. So you're going to have to take the breaths down on the lead vocal. But on the backgrounds, you could just get rid of it and then just fade in right before the word starts. Like, you don't need the breaths to sound natural. Just leave that on the leads. Spend your time getting the lead to sound great. The backgrounds, you could be more aggressive. You could fade in right where the word is. That's a big one too. What they do that I think everyone should note, compression first. Check that out. Big one. Saved it for the end. Compression first. In other words, your chain for your vocal, they talked about, John's mentioned that he sometimes will use a high pass filter to get out some low rumble, but he's putting compression before EQ. totally irrespective of whether or not there's a little high passing going on to get rid of some low rumble. It's compression first, then EQ. Consider that. A lot of people do EQ into compression. That was the way that people worked a lot, but this is not how Serban works. So keep that in mind. All right. Also, the way he does vocal delays, he doesn't have as a typical standard in his template way to go where he's running his delays into reverbs. That's a thing I've mentioned doing, and I do it a lot. And that's something he says, John says sometimes they'll do it if it needs it, but it's not their go-to on their template. They have the delays by themselves. And then, reverbs by themselves. It's not always a delay into a reverb. So keep that in mind, all right? Again, no right or wrong way to do this. It's just a lot of stuff I want people to note and understand that if you got yourself in a position where every time you mix, it feels like a spider web of things happening because you're trying to do what a lot of mixers are doing, consider the fact that some mixers are not. Some mixers are as simple as possible, straightforward, so that when they get to the end, it makes sense. And that also helps and makes it easier to print stems and things like that, which is part of the deliverables for all these guys at the top. So it almost seems silly to me to work in a way that makes it harder for you later to deliver what you need to deliver. It makes it easier when everything is easily streamlined and not sharing things to be able to deliver stuff that makes sense in a stem style, all the pieces broken down easily. So there's like a reason that you don't want to share things if you can help it. That's another Tom Lord Algae thing. He's like, why would I put like a reverb on everything? I'd rather just put the reverb on the thing. That way there's not like snare drum in my guitar reverb. And like, I don't want that. I make it as simple as possible, Tom said. So I'm just combining some of what Tom said with what John Haynes is saying to kind of, because I notice a huge parallel in the way they both work, the way Serban works, and John Haynes as his engineer. Everything John Haynes is saying he does, you got to think to yourself, if you have a guy like Serban who is your mentor, you going to work some other way? Probably not. You're probably going to do what he does, most likely. All right, so the point is, I take what he's saying as Serban said. Even though that's not what John is saying, that's how I kind of take it. So this is a great, great, great interview questionnaire thing. You guys should check that out. I'm going to link to it in the description. So I'll catch you guys soon. Just keep in mind, this is simpler than it sounds. And once you can put your mind at ease about all these things, I think you'll get there. All right? Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Leave something in the comments. I appreciate it. Take it easy. You got this.